This news has broken in the past couple of days. The IBF eliminator between Joshua Buatsi and John Pascal has fallen through. It looks like the fight isn't happening. And this is after Joshua Buatsi has failed to return a contract. And yeah, he's failed to return the contract and it looks like the fight's not going to happen. I've heard some whispers that, and these are just whispers, just rumours, so take them with a pinch of salt, that Joshua Buatsi didn't return the contract for this fight because Jean Pascal refused to sign up for VADA testing. And as I say, take them with a pinch of salt because they are just rumours. But if we consider Jean Pascal's prior form and history with performance enhancing substances, I don't think this news or this rumour is particularly unfathomable. I think is probably fairly accurate and based on reality. So yeah, the fight's not happening, but luckily, light heavyweight is a stacked division, and so that means there are plenty of other guys that Joshua Buatsi can fight, and it'll most likely be a decent fight. I'm kind of a little bit disappointed that this Jean Pascal fight isn't happening with Buatsi, because I think it would have been, at the bare minimum, a fairly entertaining fight, especially when Jean Pascal, you know, he's a massive man, he's built like a tank, he's quite explosive even at his ripe old age of, what, 40 now? How old is Jean Pascal? Doesn't say. But yeah, he's up there in age. And when Jean Pascal lets his hands go, it can be crude, it can be uncultured, but it's entertaining because he's somewhat dangerous. And Joshua Buatsi, I think the styles would have gelled well, but the fight's not happening. Woe is us. We have to move on. Joshua Buatsi has this interview with Boxing Social, which I want to draw your attention to. And the interviewer actually talks about some of the potential fights for Joshua Buatsi. And they start off talking about Anthony Yarde because they were both present at this event on Saturday when the interview was conducted. And I believe it was Saturday, sometime on the weekend. And he talks about how, that he'd love that Yarde fight and he hopes he can get it done at some point in his career because he doesn't want to look back and see that it doesn't happen and it wasn't part of his legacy, whatnot. You know, the standard fare that these guys talk about. But then the interviewer talks about Callum Smith. And what Joshua Buatsi says, I find kind of curious. It had me scratching my head a little bit because he doesn't give off vibes where he's particularly keen on fighting Callum Smith. Because he basically talks about how, because Callum Smith is #1 contender for the WBC, how if he was in Callum Smith's shoes, he wouldn't fight someone like himself. He'd look to fight the guy who was holding the belt. He'd look to fight the champion. And Joshua Buatsi also reveals that that fight was proposed to him. The Callum Smith fight was, I guess, offered to him, or he was maybe asked his opinion on that fight, if you'd like that fight. He says it was proposed to him. And so, yeah, and then he follows up with that stuff about how if he was Callum Smith, he wouldn't fight him. He'd just go for the champion. I don't know what to make of this talk by Joshua Buatsi, because if Joshua Buatsi was, I don't know, his team or Callum Smith's team reached out to his team and said, hey, would you like this fight? What do you think of this fight between your guy Joshua Buatsi and our guy Callum Smith? You know, proposals can be made and nothing comes of them. I'm aware of that. But when you factor in that, okay, this proposal's been made, and then when you see that Artur Beterbiev, who's supposed to fight Anthony Yarde at the end of this year, is out on some kind of injury, and that fight isn't going to happen until early 2023, the earliest I've seen. Because bear in mind that Artur Beterbiev, he holds the WBO, the WBC, and the IBF. So, and Bivol's fighting Zurdo Ramirez in November. So all the belts are tied up. And so Joshua Buatsi telling Callum Smith to just gun for Beterbiev doesn't make any sense. Because what is realistically, what chance or what kind of time frame will that fight between Callum Smith and Artur Beterbiev happen? That's not going to be until, mid-2023 at the earliest? Because if Artur Beterbiev isn't fighting again until early 2023, and then he's got to have some time off, and then what? Fight Callum Smith. So the fact that Joshua Buatsi says this, look, I'm not trying to say that Joshua Buatsi is ducking Callum Smith, because that fight, nothing has really come about it yet. But I'm not finding his talk surrounding that fight particularly encouraging. And since seeing this interview, I've kind of thought about it, and I think, Callum Smith isn't a fighter that I've rated particularly highly. I think he's a good fighter, a good, solid fighter. But at super middleweight, I don't know, I just didn't see anything special. And now since moving up to light heavyweight, I'm not trying to say that he's really just changed overnight. He's evolved overnight and he's a super special fighter now. But he's been on some good form since moving up to light heavyweight. He seems to be a bit more rejuvenated, quite energized, knocking guys out left, right and centre. And yeah, it's lower tier opposition. But someone like Joshua Buatsi, who is a career light heavyweight, but since he stepped up, he's looked a bit shaky, against Kalic. He could have been stopped potentially, because that eye was looking bad. He was shipping some punishment. Looked better for my money against Bolotniks, but Bolotniks maybe a bit of an undersized light heavyweight. And then most recently Spider Richards, who also come up from super middleweight, but has dimensions and a certain amount of skill to really push Joshua Buatsi. Many people thought that Spider Richards could have potentially won that fight, and to be honest, I can't hold that against you if you feel like that. I thought Joshua Buatsi won, but it certainly was a close and a tough fight for both men. And so maybe Team Buatsi saw the Pascal fight as a good name, but someone who's maybe sufficiently jaded enough to the point where the level of danger is a bit lower. Whereas Callum Smith, he's icing guys since he's moved up to light heavyweight, and he's big. This guy was massive at super middleweight, and he's still massive at light heavyweight. So yeah, I don't think that Team Buatsi is particularly keen on this fight. I'd like this fight. I think it's a good fight. I think it's a main event kind of fight. But yeah, strange things from Buatsi. I'll leave this video linked in the description box in case you want to check it out. If you just go to the 3-minute mark, you get to the part where they start talking about the Callum Smith fight. Yeah, I think it's too early, so I'm going to reserve judgment. But will we see Buatsi and his team potentially swerve this Callum Smith fight? I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Let me know what you think of this news in the comments. What do you think of this potential fight between Joshua Buatsi, Callum Smith? Is it a fight you like? And let's get some predictions in. If this fight was to happen next, who would you be picking? And also, are you disappointed that the Joshua Buatsi Jean Pascal fight is off? Or did you think it was a dud fight and hoping that Joshua Buatsi fights someone else anyway? Leave it down there and I'll get back to you. But for now, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next video.